Welcome to this evening's Student Services Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and verify that it has been posted.
Yes, it was.
Excellent, thank you. Now would be the time for our opportunity for public comment. Did we have anyone sign up?
We do not.
All right. Our first action item of the evening would be the minutes from our December 3rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve them as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Voigt.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Kozlowski. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Passes 5-0. So let's move on to our discussion information items. Our first of which is our open enrollment projections for the 25 and 26 school year.
Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. So as an annual process that we are required to do are really to look at and declare our open enrollment projections and our seats per school board policy and state statute. The state statute is 118.51. We received a reminder from DPI that this has to be taken care of prior to this meeting, so they're always on top of it that way. And the policy that we are following is 5113. So when we take a look, the information was provided, should have been provided to you. I will project it up here on the screen as well. So once again, state law requires us to do this, and these are projected seats for open enrollment. So a little definitions for enrollment purposes. Open enrollment is any students that come from outside of our school district versus school choice, which is what we allow our students to do internally. And what you can see here is that some of it's split up into monolingual and dual language seats, as well as special education programming. So that's the separate components that you will see. Again, these are projections, and these are district-wide projections. So these are not school-based projections. These are, for example, if you look at K4, we have 45 open monolingual seats. Those are at different sites. So if somebody requests a certain site, it's not a guarantee. We're just declaring that we have an opening, and if they inquire and apply, then we can see if that school has those openings for anyone who open enrolls from the outside. Some of the numbers that you see, again, school choice, sorry, just I don't know if I define that, but once again, it is our students internally who move from one school to the next, following criteria and the application process and window that has recently just closed as well. When it comes to open enrolling and the numbers that you see, you do see some zeros. When we declare a number, that's something that we have to adhere to. If we have zero, that is something that can change based on our projections, right? These are projections, and the reason that we have those projections is really based on staffing. So examples can be, we project all of our staffing, and if we were to take certain number of open enrollment students, that could put us into more staffing that we didn't project for. So that's why we declare what we declare, and this is subject to change, and it can go from zero to a higher number. But when we declare that top number, that is something that we always have to honor regardless. So that's why we have staffing match that, but we can always adjust according to the fluctuation that may happen in enrollment and the seats available. So any questions that you have in regards to open enrollment?
Mrs. Voigt.
It looks like a really high number for 4K. Is that indicative of?
That number has been pretty similar the past couple of years, looking at last year's data specifically. So.
Mrs. Kozlowski.
Taking it a little bit further, do we actually have data that says what our current requests are for this next year?
I do have that information. Give me one moment to gather it for you.
And this is including both out of district as well as inter-district, right?
So what I have currently, I have it for this school year, for the 24-25 school year. So we approved 109 open enrolled students. That's open enrolling in, that is without eAchieve. Including eAchieve, we had 187 students that we approved to come into the district. I'm sorry, that was eAchieve only. So total, we had 296 students who open enrolled between eAchieve and other schools in the district. We did deny 78 open enrolled students based on our projections from last year. Talking about special education as well, that is the other aspect of that OE projection that you see, and we stick very tight to those as well based on staffing and meeting the needs of our students that we project for.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Harlan?
Is there, how does this compare, like, I know you gave how many we are currently enrolled, but the open seats compare from previous years? Is this trending up, trending down, fairly stable?
It's been fairly stable. These numbers have been pretty solid, where we feel very comfortable knowing that, you know, in 4K we have this available for staffing where we can increase some numbers for individuals that come in. It's been very common and very consistent.
And then is there any capacity, so this is just students that are living outside and want to attend our schools, but what about a student who moves into the district? Is that is not calculated into this number, correct?
Correct. Somebody moves into our school district, regardless of numbers, we have to offer them FAPE, free and appropriate public education, and we'll do that.
Okay.
Mrs. Canning?
A question. I noticed grade 1, has 33 open seats, and each year round is much significantly lower, if any. Is that because a lot of children after kindergarten, choose to go somewhere else and open seats, or is it because there's a larger number of first grade classrooms to kind of open up the possibility of kindergartners from other districts coming in?
Yeah, I think the latter is more likely. Numbers change every year. Our enrollment has been declining on an annual basis, a small percentage. So as classes go through, the classes are usually a little larger ahead. So there is some open and some wiggle room when it comes to students who are moving on from kindergarten to first grade.
Thank you.
You had mentioned 78 denials. Are those mainly due to capacity or various reasons, or?
There would be various reasons. Oftentimes it's because we don't have the services potentially to meet the needs of students, or a student might open enroll and have behavior history, or there's definitely a legitimate reason for those aspects where we wouldn't have students come from the outside to be part of our school district.
Sure, okay. Any other questions or comments on this? All right. Then let's move on to our second discussion information item. Took them a little bit out of order, sorry about that. This would be the behavior update for the school year.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Zanobi. I just, as we come to the end of first semester, and I did title this first semester. We only have a couple of weeks here, so not lying. I'm just projecting out that this is kind of the end of first semester. So I'll call the data close enough to get to where we want to be. And just really want to update all of you on kind of what behavior looks like for this year, and spark some good conversation, answer your questions to the best of my ability, and share what that looks like. So what I ended up doing and how I ended up going about it, and I did share the packet with you on the first page, is really, you can see the heading where I have semester 1, 20-24% increase or decrease in behavior incidents to start compared to semester 1 last year, right? So we're looking at just last year compared to this year. The reason I put this data on here, and I'll go through it, and how I put it on here by percentage, is we have a different number of students. So when you look at behaviors versus students, it's really just the percentage, right? So year after year, is a percentage comparison versus talking about different number of students and et cetera, et cetera. So going across, the first thing I did was these behavior incidents are categories that we use in Infinite Campus at all of our schools to track student behavior. So I didn't put all of them in here, but I put some that were pertinent, and that is the column on your left, column 1. Looking at row 1, which is really titled Alcohol and Tobacco and Other Drugs, I have those green arrows that are down. That is really what we want to have happen when it comes to discipline and behavior. You want to see, for the most part, all behavior referral categories go down, right? So that's a green, and that's really a good thing. Doesn't mean it's always bad when it goes up. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that's what we're looking for when it comes to improvement. So taking a look at all 3 of our high schools together, so far at first semester this year compared to last year, it's down 45%. Referrals that way. So that is a positive and something to really celebrate. Looking at middle school, the great thing is there is not a lot that goes into that category when it comes to students who may be under the influence or bringing drugs to school. They had 0 incidents the year before, and they had 2 so far this year. So I just put 0 to 2 as opposed to 200% increase, right? So I think that's a little more pertinent instead of everybody going, woo! And then elementary, it's not an option, and it doesn't happen at elementaries, which, of course, is how it should be. Row 2, use possession of vaping devices. We know that vaping has increased significantly. That has been down in our high schools. We have installed vape sensors through the Verkada system. That works. I've experienced it. I think that's a direct result of some of the actions that happen through that. Middle school, down 86%. That is also significant. Same thing when it comes to just information and student sharing, speak up, speak out. That's positive. Elementary school, 0 incidents. The previous year we had 3 this year, so that's just where that is at. Move down to row 3, inappropriate language and expression. Down at the high school, 7% when you talk about overall behavior and day-to-day contact. Middle school has gone up a little bit, 4%. And then elementary school, it's gone down 16%. So some positives, 4% isn't a massive increase, and we'll see what the other things have to say. Attendance, 12% down for attendance referrals at the high school level, 10% down in middle school, and there's no data at the elementary school. When it comes to attendance, when you start to get to middle school and high school, students have a little more accountability for themselves. That's why they write referrals for middle schoolers who purposely skip when parents bring them to school. Our elementary students don't do that, which again is how it should be, and parents are generally responsible for the attendance of students when they're in elementary school, so it's not used as an option for data.
Mr. Pat, can I
Yes.
interrupt you for just a moment? So as we go through some of these, I know like where you started with alcohol, tobacco, those overall, those may be a very small number, correct? But as we look at, say, attendance or personal technology violations, those are probably a lot of instances, correct? So do you have some of the context of what the numbers sort of roughly look like as we go through some of the percentages with you, or?
Yeah, I do have access to some of the numbers.
Yeah.
Some of the numbers are in the hundreds. Others are for alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. If it's 20, it went down to 12, and that's really positive. So
Yeah,
I guess I would put that as a context. And
Yeah. I'm just trying to capture
Yeah.
a little bit of that as we go through it, because maybe someone for the first time seeing it that would watch this would say those numbers look great, but I mean,
Right.
how many instances are we really looking at? From the past, I know that some of these are big categories, obviously.
correct.
And some of the more serious offenses are very small, so relatively speaking, but overall looks good. So I just was curious if, as we go through some of these, you have a rough idea of, like
Yep.
you said, hundreds or thousands versus.
Sure, I can definitely speak to that to the best of my ability from going through the data. So alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, I would say exactly what I just said, roughly somewhere around 20 to 12, somewhere in there, if I can do my percentages correctly off the top of my head. Use possession of a vaping device, very similar in the teens, maybe the low 20s, again, almost cut in half. Inappropriate language and expression, you're probably talking in the hundreds, between 1 and 200, as far as that amount. Attendance, you're talking at the high school level pretty high, probably within 100. Middle school actually was quite a bit less, maybe in under 50 in regards to that. Repeated classroom interruption, that was in the 50s for middle school and high school. Elementary school was very low, probably in the under 20. Personal technology violation, the personal technology violation, which is, I'm sorry, let me go back up to repeated classroom interruption. You can see the data. That is an area where that has gone down, which is good, right? Students are on task. Learning can occur more in the classroom based on what is happening at our schools and their focus on discipline. Went up at the elementary level a little bit. Personal technology violation is where a personal cell phone or personal device versus the one below it, which is school technology. That personal technology violation was in the 50s for high school and middle school, and really under 20 in the elementary school. Fifth graders, many of them do have phones and devices when you get to elementary, and that was a higher percentage of the student population that were part of those referrals. So when you look at the personal technology violation, you can see that it went up in the high school. I look at that as, it's not always bad when you're cracking down on cell phones, right? So that's not a bad one to go up. Taking a look at middle school, I do want to touch on middle school a little bit, and when I talk about the school technology violation, then I really take a look at some of the things that they've done for behavior. Actually, I'll talk a little bit more about them when we look at the behavior and discipline consequences they got, to have an understanding of how they're really trying to build better relationships with students and not giving consequences, but really teaching behavior. And I'll address that in the next slide. But school technology violation, very similar to actually a little bit lower than a personal technology violation, because iPads have been here for a long time. Really, it's a device that they're on and utilizing. We have safeguards in place. Cell phones, of course, are higher because we have cracked down on those as well. I'm going to say that those were at the middle and high school, maybe in the 20s, and probably about as high as elementary because they don't have cell phones, so about the same across the board. Weapons and dangerous items was very low. Taking a look across the board, there was, I believe, 6 or 7, 6 maybe at the high school level, 5 or 6 at the elementary level, at the middle school level, and 0 to 2. And when you talk about weapons or dangerous items, that's something that at the elementary level they might have picked up, they might have carried, they might not have understood. So that's why it's a 0 to 2. It very rarely happens. These are not threats. These are just possession of those things for a variety of reasons. And seeing that they went down to, I believe we had 1 at each level so far this year where somebody was in possession of those for whatever reason. Thus you see a big decrease at the middle and the high school compared to last year at this time, where there was between 6 or 7. Next one, inappropriate location and out of bounds. This is really skipping within the school building, possibly disrupting in the hallways at the middle and high school level. That is up. Once again, if that's a crackdown and people are being a little more responsive to that, you're going to have more referrals written that way. It's not an option for elementary school. It's not even in the discipline pull-down list to be able to give. And the last one was aggressive and threatening behavior. And this is something that is definitely a concern in the middle school, that has gone up 24%. That was 100 and something, where maybe between 50 and 100 last year at the middle school level. High school, it's gone down a little bit lower at the high school level, maybe between 50 and 100 last year, or approximately, that went down 5%. Elementary school was, again, very low, maybe up to 30, because some of our students do get dysregulated and have conflict that way. So that was down 16% as well. So before I move on to the next slide, any questions on some of that information?
Ms. Canning?
Question, when it comes to the actual numbers, that would include incidences like if a student committed 3 or 4, that same student is in there 4 times. Is that
Correct. Yep. Number of incidents. So you could have a student who did some of these things a multitude of times, one student accounting for significant number of
Right.
referrals.
So in other words, it could be, there are 20 instances, it could be 4 students caused 20 instead of 20 separate students.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
A question on the top too, the possession and vaping. Would a lot of that be attributed to the security protocols that have been put in place in the last year to some extent?
Yes. Some of the things and that's generally at the middle school and high school level. We obviously involve our SROs who are very good at searching, very respectful, trained professionals to do it. They do have the assistance of wands and aspects that they can use. That, along with our Verkada system, has really done a great job of getting students to think twice about bringing those things to school. And so you are seeing that reflected here.
Okay, thank you.
How does attendance defined? Is this missing the entire class, late? What is, like, how does that break down into a specific instance?
If there's an attendance referral that's written, it's because they've gone to the point where they've missed a certain number of days truant. So this is where our truancy comes into play. It could be a multitude of tardies that add up to be truancy, and then a referral is written. So it is moving along that path of truancy for our students. And that looks differently. There are certain thresholds where you receive letters that go home, and then consequences accordingly based on that progression of attendance. So that's what that reflects.
Go ahead.
One more, sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess how have we engaged the parents and families to drive this improvement, or do you see that we need to take new actions to get them involved? Obviously, the attendance at the middle and high school is more difficult for the parents to control other than conversations, but I mean the cell phones, obviously, like how do we engage the parents and families to drive improved behaviors?
Our schools do a great job of that. It really starts with principal leadership. Through multitude of communication methods, they're going to focus on the areas that impede learning the most, right? So all of our strategic action plans for our principals have a focus on behavior for within their building. So they're looking at their building data and they're focusing on actions to be able to, to mitigate that behavior through whatever they put into place within their building to address it. And that always bleeds out into communication with parents through parent committees that are at the schools, through newsletters that continue to go out, and really saying, hey, here's what we're focused on. Please continue to support us. We're in this together. Very few parents want their kids to be disruptive in school and not get a good education. So, getting the word out and having parents be part of that is very helpful, but it's really through communication of the focus for the school building that they can kind of wrap around and partner with leadership on and each school on.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue on.
Okay, moving on to the next slide, which I referenced. So this is semester one increase, decrease of the disciplinary action compared to semester one, again, of last year, the same time frame. And looking at our out-of-school suspension data and going across, the total number of out-of-school suspensions is not that high. I don't want to get that wrong. Maybe between 25 and 50. Not higher than 50 at the high school level, less at the middle school, and very minimal at the elementary school, under 8, something to that effect. So this is out-of-school suspension. This is really the largest discipline measure that schools have. If you're obviously excluding someone from school, it's a major offense, depending on the length of that out-of-school suspension. So high school is down 9% at the same time frame compared to last year. Middle school is also down 39% compared to this time last year, and that's significant. Elementary school is down just a little bit compared to this time last year. Moving to the next row, in-school suspension, that is up. So you could say, at the high school level, did they substitute in-school suspension for out-of-school suspension? In-school suspension generally allows students to do work, to stay engaged at school. Sometimes there's a gray line if it's an out-of-school or in-school, and choosing in-school can be a really good option for everyone. It just depends on the situation. Middle school is way down again, 26% less when it comes to in-school suspension. In-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. In-school suspension is always higher than out-of-school, no more than 30 at the middle and high school, and a little bit higher than maybe above 10 at the elementary school. Not much more than that. That was up a little bit as well for in-school suspension. Pre-expulsion meetings, so Mr. Lennerer, who has been at this committee and shared some of the alternatives we have for pre-expulsion, that's down 5% compared to last year at this time at the middle and high school. So I combine those, so those numbers are the same because they're all one lump sum. So that's a positive, and there's no data at elementary because there's been none done at the elementary level. Moving to detention, when you take a look at the high school, that's kind of your first and foremost attention getter, that kind of tier one, what we would say, like, hey, I've reminded you, now here we go, kind of a first offense component. It's up at the high school. Again, that's not always bad, 7% isn't terrible. Down significantly at the middle school by 41%. Elementary school, it is up 8% as well, same time last year. Not significant outliers, just up a little bit. Detention is not as prevalent at the elementary school. I can't remember the exact numbers. I don't think it's much more than 30 at the elementary level. At high school, it's up between 50 and 100. Middle school, it's actually very low this year and hasn't been much higher than 50 last year. Moving on to the no-pass list, that is something that when we get to the out-of-bounds component and we talk about really trying to have hallways be clear, students be able to do that, and then maybe some impacts at the high school level of the block schedule where there's less transitions. The no-pass list is up 88% because there's probably less students in the hall, and those that are in the hall are going to be focused on a little bit greater because there's just not as many transition times. And if students are in the hall more and more because they're trying to get out of class, it's just something that is being addressed. So at the middle school, it's down 42%, and that's not even an option at elementary when it comes to a pass. And the middle school is very small numbers of a no-pass list. They don't really use it that much, probably under 10. So give you a context there. No-pass list at the high school level, though, is pretty significant, between 30 and 50 for that. To me, it shows that the halls are definitely being addressed at our high schools for some of the students who might be out and about. And then the conference warning. So this is really the student conference component. It's down at the high school level for some, comparatively. There's not a ton of them at the high school level. Generally, the older the students are, the more they understand what they should be doing or not be doing. So yes, there's conferencing and a detention. Usually the detention is what comes first or whatever else, and the conferencing is a little bit less used, so that's pretty small, so that percentage is a little misleading because there's not a lot of them. But at the middle school, it is up 23%, and they use it significantly in the 200 to 300 range, a couple hundred range. And at the elementary school, it's down 40%. Again, they do use it probably up to 50, between 50 and 60, but it is down a little bit right now. I don't have a great explanation for that other than to potentially say they're having less behavior issues, so they're conferencing less. I'll stay in that positive light. So getting back to what I wanted to address before is the middle school, and you take a look at those out-of-school suspension, in-school suspension, detention, and no pass list, but then look at the conference component up. Middle schools are really working through coming together around behavior, using a positive behavior intervention and support system. We had talked earlier in this year at the board level and on this committee around Navigate 360, which is being piloted to teach behaviors at our middle schools. So you are seeing the use of that program with our students in the middle school level to be able to teach better behaviors along with a reward system that is incentivizing them to behave better. And I think you're seeing the direct results of some of that in this data. again, these numbers aren't all significantly high total numbers of things and events that happened, but they're significant enough where these are really nice percentages to see. And I would expect that conferencing to go up. It doesn't mean that they're not being disciplined. It doesn't mean there's not communication and consequences, but it may look different, or what's happening might be more restorative and teaching, which is really where we want to move as a system. Better connections, better engagement, which is increasing student engagement through attendance, is the student services KPI. And this is a correlation to that with what they're trying to do. So, any questions on this data?
Mrs. Kozlowski.
Thank you. We have data by school, correct, too? That
Correct, yes.
could get- I'd like to see that. So a couple pieces so what is the reporting requirement? So to show up on a report like this or a metric, what is the qualifying event that we are reporting something? Because the follow-up is, are we reporting everything?
That's a great question. Some schools report more than other schools. They would report a conversation, or might report a conversation more or more often than somebody else has a corrective conversation. Probably not significantly, but we do have schools that like to write more referrals than other schools. So to answer your question and to look at that data, yes. At the middle school level, we have one school that writes significantly more referrals than another school, and there's one that's in the middle. They are using that data because they really want to track it, and they are that's what they are doing, and how they are going about it is a system that works for them. The other school that has less referrals is still engaging in the same components of PBIS. How they're going about it and how they're doing it is similar, but not, they don't have as many behaviors and historically haven't, and they're also tracking it differently than maybe an Infinite Campus through some of these behavior components. So it's used a little bit differently.
Okay. I want to talk a bit about the positive reinforcement with a reward system in a context of how we're using that as restorative. And I want to use an example, and it's hypothetical, but it happens in our district. So at different stages, so at an elementary school, middle school, and high school, let's say a disruptive student recurringly picks up said desk and throws it or screams. What different approaches are we taking at different levels? Because at some point, the positive reward restorative piece is something where I think consequences are different. For example, a high school student that is set to graduate within the next couple years finds herself in an employer, that would be grounds for termination and most likely assault charges. So that's very one-sided, but I am very interested in understanding more about the positive reinforcement to the reward system as a means to change behavior.
So the difference and why we're talking about it is the proactive approach, right? Having the system in place, very clearly defined, and hey, here are things that, by doing these things that we expect of you, these are it's a good thing to do. Going above and beyond, here's the positive components. That's proactive. The reaction, which is really what severe behavior consequences are to student behavior, still exist. So it doesn't take the place of. The proactive approach is meant to mitigate some of those larger behaviors, to build that connection ahead of time through positive behaviors, through connections, so those other things aren't happening as often. And that's the goal of it. So it doesn't mean that consequences don't happen on the back end. It is meant to be that we are mitigating those consequences by working hard on the front end to build relationships, to understand the student, to put something in place that makes the student feel belonging and mitigate those back end reactive consequences.
I appreciate that, because I did like the last time that we talked about it, about the program and how we do kind of the affirmations and those pieces on the front end. But there is still the pieces at what point is now education a complete disruption, and consequences of removing the student have to occur. And I think that makes sense. Okay? Thank you.
Mrs. Canning?
Okay, to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Kozlowski just said, the number one concern or complaint that I hear when I visit middle school and talk with middle school teachers in our district is the behavior, and what they perceive to be a lack of follow-through and a lack of commitment to end the behavior once and for all, and they feel sometimes that it just kind of continues through the process, through the, trying to mitigate everything you said. Looking at it from a teacher's perspective, I still have my teacher eyes on this. I'm looking at the data, and I noticed that the aggressive, threatening behavior, inappropriate, location, conference warning, that's all up. But then on the flip side, I see suspensions are down, detentions are down, the no pass list down. That all looks great. I find myself wondering at what cost, though. Are the teachers more or less having to continuously warn, process, work through this within their classrooms, within their school day, so that we can have these glowing, drop in detention? I guess at what point I'm wondering that this falls on the teacher to continuously have to put up with these disruptive behaviors that are happening, that are clearly, represented in the data, but yet they're not reflected in the overall detentions, suspensions. So that would be my wondering, because of what has been shared with me and what I'm seeing here. Are we expecting an enormous amount of, efforts, follow through from the classroom teachers, with regard to restorative justice, with regard to the mitigation and the process? So that would be my wondering, based on what I've heard and what I see. So I don't know if you have any comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, our classroom teachers are expected to have the tools to be able to teach well in the classroom, right? Which from teaching and learning and all the things that we are doing to, recruit, hire, build them to be great educators. It starts with them being highly engaging in the classroom, having high expectations, having certified and viable curriculum that they can have, right? So we're working hard to get that into the hands of our teachers, having high expectations, and that is happening, as we speak and continuing to move forward. We haven't necessarily done much with behavior. Teachers always have to address behavior. That's never not been something they haven't had to do. And our most effective educators do that really well. They are proactive. They build relationships. They work to have those things happen, and then they use that relationship and leverage it because it's authentic, and then they take their teaching skills and they move forward. And are able to educate kids with minimal disruption. They're still always navigating behavior. They're purposeful with it. They're connecting with students. A PBIS system is meant to actually empower our teachers to have really a matrix and a criteria of what is expected of students that they can reinforce, because there are teachers at all of our levels where you go into their classroom and they're highly effective in every aspect of what they do, discipline, teaching, etc. We have others that are really good teachers and maybe not great disciplinarians, and so the classroom sometimes is here and there, and they have to grow like anyone else does. And the goal of what we're talking about here is we should see less behavior if we're giving tools to our teachers, and leadership is providing that through PBIS. It doesn't mean that teachers aren't being supported. Teachers are expected to do discipline in the classroom, especially detentions, other aspects. High disruption, that's a different conversation, and that's really what I talked to Mrs. Kozlowski about, that there is a point where the support goes different and administration would step in, and there's all sorts of other ways that we would go with a student that way. So having that PBIS system and proactive approach is necessary for teachers to feel more empowered, and to reestablish that and to have leadership dive into that should make teachers feel really positive around the direction we're going. And then we can really redefine it in each building, and then hopefully see this data continue to move in a positive direction. So,
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as there is that point where, the interventions clearly aren't working. and then they move to the next level.
And we have some work to do on those interventions, right? So you talk about things that we're looking to do where that aren't necessarily in place. You would have some of our student services personnel meeting with groups of students around their attendance in the hallway, right? There's 7 kids who like to roam around all the time. How are we really teaching them what that looks like, what they're missing, building a relationship with another individual? Some of those things happen, again, intermittently here and there, but we really are looking to put a system in place. Again, part of that is a positive behavior system, but better interventions as well that teachers are aware of, that all feeds into a system where they know what their point is, where it has to move to this next tier, and then everybody is on the same page versus people feeling like they're not supported. And that's where we're trying to move.
Great, thank you.
I would just echo that or add on to that with our guaranteed and viable curriculum that we've been moving forward with. The longer the teachers have those resources, the more familiar they are with that daily lesson planning and what's going on. And then once they're used to that, then it's easier to bring in those different engaging activities. And that's where we're, get the kids up and moving. It's not just sit and get. So that's some of the strategies too of not just the consequences, the proactive engaging lessons that are going on in the classroom of, just how do you plan for that? How do you get kids moving? How do you get them talking so that they are all actively engaged rather than passively disengaged?
Other questions on this slide?
So now that you commented on getting students up and moving, I know that sometimes teachers move to take away recess or something. Like, how is that captured in these numbers elementary schools? I'm thinking my younger squirrely boys, right? How is that captured when it's more of like a wider punishment for a larger group? Are they going in and tracking each individual, or is that captured in this data?
It's a great question. If it is captured in the data, I would expect it to be under detention because they wouldn't, at the elementary level, be allowed to have recess. I can't say for sure exactly how our elementary schools are tracking that, but detention is the only thing that I'm aware of that they would be able to select because they're holding that student in and not allowing them to go and do recess. So it's a really good question that I will dive into with our elementary principals to really get an idea of what that looks like and how they're keeping track of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I do have one more slide, just something to share again. And so this is this year's data, just something that to give a perspective of our students and really what it has looked like so far this first semester. So in looking at our current 6th grade students compared to our current 5th grade students, when students went to 6th grade, I kind of looked at it like 5th graders do this and 6th graders do this, but it's really two separate, it's not a cohort. It's 6th grade, 65% higher in the number of referrals our 6th graders are producing than our current 5th graders as of right now. So it's more than double the amount of referrals, and it's in the hundreds. So that is something that is up. Our 7th graders continue to even move further beyond our 6th graders. They are at the middle school by far the highest number of referrals by hundreds compared to 6th graders who are also higher than our 5th graders by around 100 something. 8th graders, obviously that goes down from 7th compared to the 8th graders, about half, that gets cut in half as 8th graders. When those 8th graders currently compared to our freshman students at the high school level by far have the most number of referrals, total among the schools in the several hundreds. But every year you see that kind of step down, sophomore, junior, senior year, and it's significantly lower each time. So this is from one grade to the next to the next. So 9th grade is very high, but it goes down 40%, then another 30, and another 20 from the grade that's already down from the grade before. So our seniors had 100-something referrals, our freshmen over 500, closer to 800. So that is the difference in the high school projection. Eighth graders going to ninth grade also drop in their referrals. So even though ninth graders are highest at the high school level, eighth graders are lower at the middle school. They still decrease when they go to high school. At the elementary, it was interesting data. Our highest referral grade is fourth grade, significantly, by more than 100 compared to our first graders, who also have some referrals, and then the other grades are very similar with around 200, 100 to 200 referrals, and that's all of our schools, so to give you an idea of that. Questions on this?
Mrs. Kozlowski.
You may have just burst my bubble a little bit on the fourth grade data, not that I like it. But a question not solving on anything, but it's more of a maturity standpoint and whether or not that movement to middle school is a year too soon. From their maturity and their emotional response to it, are we putting them in an environment that for many of them they're not prepared for? And then they evolve through that through course of time as they grow and mature, but it's just a question.
It's a good question. One thing I could say from the data is that our seventh graders, who it's year 2 in middle school, have total almost 200 referrals more than our sixth graders, even though our sixth graders went up from fifth grade.
As I said,
So-
looking at it, it's like I may have burst my own bubble, but just
Yeah.
middle school is a tough group.
So, not seeing any other comments at the moment. Obviously, coming back from COVID, we had behaviors off the chart. I think everyone experienced that, districts everywhere. And I believe in probably the year after we wanted to obviously get a handle on that, I think we started collecting more of these instances. I think, correct me if I'm wrong on that, maybe Dr. Siebert. So we started to capture every instance we could and report on that. I remember some of those numbers were very high, but in order to get a handle on those things, we wanted to see that big picture. And so I bring that up because I think looking at this now, part of my question is, has that started to equalize or even come down? But at the same time, we're trying to capture more data so that we have a better understanding of what's really going on. Is that fair to say? I mean, has things equalized? What we've put in place seems to be a lot more. I recall one of the big pushes was to just try to take a universal approach everywhere, which sounds like that's been done. And now that we're a couple years past that, your sense of kind of where this is at now and the process is working, we've got some more tools in place, but what's your sense or feeling on that?
So in looking at our, 5-year data trends around behavior with COVID in there, along with really changing some of the categories in Infinite Campus. So trying to add things that make sense, capturing things that, there's a little bit of play of how you code your discipline and where a category falls, right? It's not always cut and dry that this goes here, this goes there. So with new categories and different things, the data has been fairly inconsistent, right? Some things are comparable to say we're not that far off from pre-COVID. You also have less students, all sorts of different things that come into play to talk about the data, but it is there, and some comparables are that my sense is we're coming back to being in a good place. We have work to do, though. The work I talked about when it comes to behavior, we have a behavior team at the district level, and then in my department, we're also kind of supporting that team. So we are committing to it differently than we have in my time here. And so with what we're seeing data-wise and some of the things we're putting in place, we feel like we're moving in a good direction.
Okay. Certainly seems like it from what's been presented, so that's excellent. Any other questions or comments on this? All right. Well, thank you for that presentation. I know it's a lot to go through for us. Appreciate it. So our last order then would be recommendations for future meetings. Seeing none, we will be meeting on the 4th, I believe, of February, right here at 6 o'clock. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.